Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Rishi Agrawal, co-founder and CEO at TeamLease RegTech. I welcome all of you to yet another session of a deep and insightful discussion on rethinking compliance management in the digital age. As they say, data is the new oil. The world around us is fast growing digital. Some of the crazy people have even gone to the extent of saying software is eating the world. Our personal lives have been greatly transformed with technology. The way we eat, the way we travel, the way we learn, the way we entertain ourselves, all of those things have quickly gone digital. Our work life is also going digital at a fast pace. The way we used to work in enterprises about 5 years ago seems very different from the way things are going right now. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting some of the brightest minds, the legal minds and the compliance minds, who between them bring over 90 years of experience to share their thoughts with us on how the future of compliance is going to look like, how the current world of compliance is changing with technology. So let me take a minute, introduce our panelists. With me, I have Manjaree Chowdhary. Manjaree is a senior executive and general counsel of Maruti Suzuki India. She brings over 25 years of rich and deep experience working across South Asia, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan in diverse industries like manufacturing, industrial, auto, healthcare, power, and services. Manjaree is a winner of the prestigious Weekwall Asia Pacific Award in the business security category in September 21. She was featured in the top 100 powerful women in law in 2017 and was facilitated at the Indo-UK Law Society Summit at the House of Lords in London for contribution to Indian corporate legal sector. She was recognized as General Counsel of the Year at the prestigious Legal Era Annual Indian Lawyers Awards 2020 and was a part of the elite list of business top 100 GCs in India in 2022. Manjaree is a Felix Scholar and Masters in Law from University of London with distinction. Manjaree's leadership has brought recognition to Maruti Suzuki's legal team by being included in the Legal 500 GC Power List India Teams 2019 and being recognized as the best in-house legal team in India at the prestigious Legal Era India Awards 2021 for the first time. She is also nominated member of the CII National Committee on Regulatory Affairs and the Board of UK-India Partnership. She is a visiting speaker at top business and law colleges in India. Manjaree is passionate about diversity and inclusion. She is located in Gurugram and enjoys reading, dancing, interior designing, and watching movies. Welcome, Manjaree. Welcome to our discussion today. As all of you know, she is one of the most respected general counsels in the country, and we are privileged to have her here for us discussion today.
Thank you, Rishi.
Let me move on, introduce our next panelist, Kanika Bhutani. Kanika is the Ethics and Compliance Professional at Nokia, where she leads the Global Anti-Corruption Center of Excellence, Ethics and Compliance. She is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad, where she completed her Accelerated General Management Program. Kanika led multiple matters involving non-compliance of various anti-corruption statutes, working closely with the CXOs and board members to identify risks, determine potential vulnerabilities, and recommend solutions from a business and operational perspective. In addition, she has undertaken various sensitive investigations into employee misconduct, harassment, fraud, anti-bribery, and corruption matters, both for Indian and multinational corporations. She has designed ethics and compliance programs, including setting up policies, procedures, and related processes. She brings deep experience in conducting risk assessments, classroom, and online trainings. Kanika is currently based in New Delhi. Earlier, she was based at Chicago with Ernst & Young, working with clients across United States, Africa, India, and South America. Kanika, welcome. And our last participant today is CV Raghu. Raghu is the Group General Counsel in a global role at the Motherson Group. He drives the legal, secretarial, regulatory compliance, and governance processes across the globe for the Motherson Group. Raghu brings over 3 decades of rich and varied experience across industries in large business conglomerates, including the Max Group, American Express, and Hindustan Unilever. He has served on several boards, advisory boards, various committees since 1998. So you can see the kind of deep experience Raghu brings to the table. He's the president and founding member of General Counsel's Association of India. He's a qualified lawyer from Delhi University, a diploma holder in industrial relations and personnel management, and a certified associate of Indian Institute of Bankers. In addition, Raghu has numerous other certifications from the Harvard Law School, Washington University, and other premier global institutions. Welcome, Raghu.
Thank you, Rishi.
All right, so really excited about what we have here today. We have three speakers from some of the largest sectors in the country. Automobiles, where India ranks number 4 in the world right now in terms of the number of automobiles manufactured. We are likely to become 3rd in this decade. We've overtaken giants like South Korea and Germany over the past 1 year. We produce a car literally every 8 minutes, and Maruti Suzuki has a large role to play in transforming that market. We produce over 4 million automobiles a year. So that's an important market for GDP, for economy, for jobs, for formalization, and everything else that we know. Auto components, $46 billion industry, expected to grow many-fold into $200 billion in the current decade, accounts for almost 2.5% of the GDP of the country, and employs 5 million people. So you can imagine that's where Raghu comes from, the automobile component manufacturers growing rapidly at a compounded growth rate of about 6% in the last few years. Exports with about $15 billion in exports and likely to cross about $80 billion. So both Manjaree and Raghu represent automobile and auto component industry. Both of them have huge contribution to the economy. Kanika comes from the electronics industry, about $18 billion right now, slated to become $300 billion in the current decade, contributes about 3% to the GDP. So as you can imagine, the three speakers that we have today are bringing a phenomenal amount of experience. At the same time, they represent industries which contribute extensively to jobs, to economy, to GDP, to growth, and the India story in this current decade. So let's start the discussion today. I would like to take you through 3 or 4 slides to lay the foundation of the complexity of compliance management in India, and then we'll start the conversation. Many of you have seen this slide before. Just as a memory jogger, India's employers, they are accountable for about 1,536 acts and rules, under which we have about 69,233 unique compliances with about 6,618 filings across 7 broad categories that you see on your slide. Led by labor, which constitutes 30% in terms of acts, 47% in terms of compliance, and a whopping 68% in terms of criminality, which is a concurrent subject of the Constitution, and a large chunk of compliances for every organization comes from the labor laws. We are living in interesting times, and we are going to witness one of the most transformative labor law transformation which we have seen in independent India in 75 years. The codification process is currently going on. That's labor for you. Environment, health and safety, which deals with all of Environment Protection Act of 1986 and all the related rules, solid waste management, e-waste management, hazardous waste management, batteries rules, air, water, soil pollution, all of that sits there. Finance and taxation, as you all know, CBIC, CBIT, direct tax, indirect tax, customs, FEMA, advanced tax, income tax, GST, and all of that falls there. Commercial deals with equipment. So 2 of the 3 panelists today, they represent large manufacturers, and those deal with commercial compliances all the time. Hoists, lifts, fire extinguishers, weights and measures, all of those fall there. Secretarial, as we all know, deals with company law practices and SEBI. A lot of compliances sit there, and then industry specific, which are sectoral in nature. Moving on, a lot of research that we as a company have done over the last 8+ years have led us to create this infographic, which is the country's compliance heat map, talks about compliance burden across various states. And I definitely don't intend to go through all the data points, but at leisure, please feel free to go through them. Moving on, just for making sure all of us know what compliances are, these are some illustrative examples so that all the audience and the panelists are on the same page. examples of licenses, registrations, permissions, consent orders, returns, registers, challans, payments, remittances, renewals, notices, exemptions. These are some examples, not an exhaustive list of compliance. So let's unshare the screen. Let's start with the conversation today. Manjaree, let me bring you into the conversation quickly. You've been doing this a long time, right? And with some of the largest in the country. Share with us the key challenges around compliance management from your experience.
Thank you, Rishi, and for a very warm welcome and introduction, and also the segue into what is compliance and therefore what we are going to be talking about in the next 1 hour. I think, you've said it all, that, compliance is only, the need for compliance is only growing steadily, and it is in an evolving phase, continues to evolve. In fact, I've seen it evolve in the last 10 decades and it doesn't seem to be stopping. So the number of regulations that impact us are steadily growing. There is a mounting determination by regulators to enforce compliance. That's a new thing that we have begun to see. And also there is an increasing pressure from the various stakeholders, who could be your investors, you could be your shareholders, your board members, and the public at large, who wish to see you do your business in a more compliant manner. I wouldn't be amiss if I said that this all ties into the latest regulation, which is on the ESG disclosures, which have become applicable from the 1st of April of 2022 for the top 1,000 listed entities in the country. And Raghu's company and mine certainly fall in that category. So ESG is such a broad term. All that you talked about on the various types of compliances are all encapsulated in these 3 small alphabets, which is environmental, social, and governance. Any and everything that you do in a company is actually covered by this. So there lies the importance of having a very, very comprehensive compliance program to be able to deal with this. On the challenges side, 2, I just mentioned the increasing number of legislations. The line items of compliances that you need to adhere to are steadily on the increase. Not only that, but the changes and the rapid changes that happen in the various laws and regulations makes compliance management that much more difficult. And it becomes more so in companies which have a size and scale like the ones of all 3 of ours, which are spread overseas, which are domestically as wide as perhaps Maruti is, covering the entire breadth and width of the country, and even you have extraterritorial jurisdictions as well. So compliance, to my mind, is not only important but is of increasing importance, and all these factors also contribute to its increasing challenge of management. To add to that, I would feel that, in large organizations, you have, there is a difficulty of siloed business functions, so because of the largeness of the size and scale, the business functions in themselves become mini sort of companies within themselves. And sometimes that adds to the complexity of compliance, to my mind, because there is no one common metric. To get a common metric, to get a common system that runs across all these different verticals and businesses, to come to common sort of outcomes and understandings on compliance is a challenge. It is something that we can talk about later as to how to overcome that, but certainly is a challenge. And even in many companies, of course, we are becoming more and more agile and more technologically savvy. Most of us have already been on that bandwagon, others are joining it, but there is still a vast number of companies who still run their compliances manually. So you have data sheets and you have spreadsheets, and every time somebody talks about, okay, how is the compliance health of this organization? It can take you good 10 days to a month to collate information, to bring it together. And that in today's age is extremely tardy and doesn't serve the purpose at all. So, and then visibility. Again, it brings me back to how much visibility do we bring to compliance? Compliance is usually understood generally as statutory compliance. And statutory compliance certainly has a very, very large and perhaps the major part of compliance management is statutory compliance. You know how much it's assigned to some people, and some people are responsible for it, usually the compliance department. And there is a perception that, you know, a measly sum of 3-4 people in the compliance department are expected to run that whole mandate. But that's not the way it is. It has to be spread across the entire organization. And therefore, how much of this, because of its spread, it is important to bring visibility to it right at the top. How much of visibility do we have at the management level or at the board level to compliances? And I'm not talking of evolved companies, I'm talking of the general here, you know, when we are talking for the benefit of so many of our people in the audience today. So the visibility to that at the top also becomes a challenge very often. And, you know, those are, as we call, you know, there is a lack of tone at the top to be able to bring about a method to this madness, which we are all expected to adhere to. So those, to start with, Rishi, were some of my top challenges that I can think of.
Manjaree, thanks a lot. You've added new dimensions, fluid regulatory environment being one of them. As I like to describe it, you're in a plane and the plane is flying some 40,000 feet above the ground, and somebody's trying to constantly tinker with the engine of the plane is not a very comfortable feeling, right? I mean, that's how the 4,000 plus regulatory changes that we see across the length and breadth of India means to a compliance officer. So, you know, let me take that segue and request Raghu to come into the conversation. Both of you come from adjacent industries. You know, you make the automobile, and Raghu's company in many ways creates the components, you know, for that. A large organization, many different entities, many different states, large labor presence, a lot of contractors. You know, he deals with a large and complex and multi-business, multi-location, multi-entity organization. Raghu, help us understand the complexity of your business.
Thanks, Rishi. First and foremost, thanks for that gracious introduction. Secondly, I think you took a very interesting example of a plane, you know, and that is something that often I speak when I speak on compliance. I say you should be like a pilot every time you get into a plane, because, and that's the reason why you have the lowest number of disasters on air, because every time the pilot steps into the plane, he checks every knob that is there. He till the time is checked. If there are 100 switches, he has to check all the 100 before he even can start the engine. So you have a very interesting example. So therefore, there are less disasters on air. But having said that, you know, that's just on the lighter note. I think Manjaree covered it a lot in terms of the change in compliance environment. I don't know. Well, we can go on speaking about the change in environment, and the regulations, and all that. I think the complexity is happening in manifold. One, the regulators, the lawmakers, all of them are coming out with new and new regulations because of the change in times. On the other side, the basics that the organizations used to do earlier are being left out, because one does not replace the other. To give you a very small example, in the sense that for compliance, and you made me sound very old when you said more than 3 decades, but that's a fact. You know, so when we first joined a job, you were not only given a workstation, you were given a standard operating process for your job. You know, and that used to surprise me when I joined Unilever and Amex. You know, on your table, unlike a calendar, you'll have a calendar kind of thing which you define SOPs. So if you have to do a particular thing, what all basic steps that you have to do. And today, most often people don't follow a process in terms of how things have to be done. So that's one on the people side. The second thing is that the compliance is not just limited to the statutory compliances. While most of it, majority of that is statutory compliance, but there are laws which basically are how do you conduct your business? How do you conduct, which is a much larger landscape than the statutory compliances of labor, contract labor, factory license, all that, because that you do, and you can actually put somebody on the job saying that this is your job. But how do you prevent transactions which do not fall, or which are no way uh, associated with anything called money laundering? How do you ensure that people, we today operate to what, nearly 160,000 employees, um, listed entities. I'm sure Manjaree and Kanika will also bear with me. Listed entities, you have this insider trading. How do you know somebody is not making money on the insider trading? Uh, if the number of people are large, how do you prevent harassment? How do you prevent people from taking bribe? You rightly said, in manufacturing sector, we have so many vendors, so many, tier 2 vendors and tier 3 vendors, and how do you play the whole game, that the compliance piece, because one non-compliance, even on any bribery in India, we operate in 42 countries, we could be prosecuted in the US. That's how FCPA reads, and that's how the UK Bribery Act reads. So it's so important for the tone at the top. And I'm a very firm believer, maybe a little bit old school. Uh, Compliance is not about tick box compliance. Compliance is a way of life, and that has to be driven top down, right to the last. It must be in the DNA. The reason why you see more financial organizations into compliance is because the whole concept of compliance started with the American financial institutions when they were badly hit for various securities exchange transactions. So actually the journey of compliance started. The other sectors used to do compliance, but it was more like to enable their business, not necessarily to be governed very well. But I think the awareness is coming, and it's coming at a very rapid pace. I don't envy the compliance officer's job anymore. I used to, at one point of time, I used to think that they're very powerful, but today I only can pity them, because with the number of things, and it has grown from complex to complex. It's become more and greater complexity. Like the sector-wise regulators have, a lot of sector-wise regulators have come up. Earlier, it used to be only, I'm saying 3 decades back, you heard only of the Reserve Bank of India when it came to foreign exchange, and rest were not. Today, you have IRDA, you have the host of regulators. So when you have to web all these laws, if say a company is into a particular sector of business which has a regulator and also has forex transactions, so you have the RBI, you have something else. So you have multi-regulatory environment where anybody and everybody can actually haul you up. So, and you have to comply with that. And that has been one of the significant things that we have been doing in the past, that you go to the regulator and tell me, buddy, you decide which of the rules must overrule the other one. So that kind of thing. So you have to be quick on your feet, and you have to be able to really articulate, because the compliance officer has the unenviable job of telling people what they are supposed to do. Because if the compliance officer says go left, and the guy will go left, and if it's non-compliant, then the guy will be hauled up, will be the compliance officer. So it's a very challenging job, very interesting environment. But I think while digitalization, technology, all of that has helped and will continue to help in terms, but there will still be a huge part of the compliance which has to be application of mind. It has to be application of mind. Technology can only be a tool. Technology cannot be the end. You have to use the technology, but you have to apply your mind. And that's something that people who are in the compliance world should not forget, because anything that is a tick box can be used through technology, but anything where you have to apply, whether you want to, one of the things that I learned during my banking days is that there's something known as a credit officer's intuition. You can fulfill all the criteria, but if the credit officer doesn't like you, he may decline the loan. And that's a very important thing. That's where the application of mind comes in, because there's something that is not smelling right. There's something that is not tasting right, and you got to be very careful. And unless it is You have to train people on compliance because people must believe in compliance. Any amount of tools, any amount of internal policies, processes will only be as good as if the people don't believe. People will find ways not to do it. And people will not, unless they understand why they have to do it, they will never do it.
Very
So
well said.
I'll just pause there and we'll see. Go ahead, Rishi.
Very well said. You know, supercomputer is only as good as the person sitting in front of the supercomputer.
That's right.
Right? In technology, there is a popular lingo, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
That's right.
So the people really leverage the product. Otherwise, you're not going to get there.
Rishi, honestly, just one line on that. And that is something that really worries me after three and a half decades in this industry, that the people's focus and understanding of why you need compliance. Because we are in that age where everyone is rushing everything. The end justifies the means. Even I don't know how many people these days teach those things, that the means always justify the end, and therefore in that rush to achieve more and more and get faster, the means is compromised, and over a period of time somebody catches up with you, and certainly the regulators. That's why you hear these days on the newspaper, you don't read good news, you always see who's got arrested. That's only because of this. Sorry. Yeah.
Very well said. I do want to remind our audience, there is a report that we have authored some time ago called Jailed for Doing Business, which actually meticulously goes through 69,233 unique compliances across 1,536 acts and rules, and identifies 26,134 which have clauses for imprisonment. And we have dissected that data threadbare, and we made that case that it's high time that 21st century entrepreneurs of India, they not go through the hostility and entrenched distrust in our regulatory environment. So thank you, Raghu. 160,000 people with operations across 42 different countries, working with thousands of tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers and contractors. Very, very large and complex organization. Hats off to you and your team for doing, within quotes, the way I like to call it, a thankless job. A compliance officer's job is a thankless job. If things go smooth, nobody cares about you. If things go off rails, suddenly you are the man in the spot. So thank you so much. Let me bring Kanika into the picture. Raghu mentioned the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers. He also spoke about the FCPA and other bribery regulations globally. Kanika brings deep expertise on the subject. So taking a little bit of a detour, Kanika, if you can throw some light on that, and then take the question around what's the complexity of managing compliance?
Thank you so much, Rishi. Thank you for the warm welcome earlier, and lovely hearing Manjaree and Raghu share their thoughts on what the complexity they see. Manjaree's focus on the regulatory piece, Raghu's focus on the on-ground piece, and the different complexities which real life brings to our table. And I think one of the things that I always say, that as a compliance officer, the number one thing is the compliance just no longer sits just within the compliance department. You have finance doing compliance, you have HR doing compliance, you have your secretarial teams, which may be sitting separately, legal, and of course the compliance team also puts its hands up and says we do something, right? As part of this environment inside an organization, the similar kind of almost widespread external environment, if you think about it, you have as you've been speaking about the number of regulations that a country has to comply with, you're also talking about international laws like trade compliance, right? Okay, what happened with the whole Russia piece? All the number of sanctions everywhere. Myanmar, human rights violations, right? There is this really 30,000 feet above the ground picture, what the pilot sees, and then there is the on-ground picture. So going through the multiverse of what this new world is creating for us, the complexities in a technology space. Think about what's coming up from compliance perspective when you're talking about mobile apps, your digital compliance, you hosting parties on your mobile app. We have a Play Store. So that's something new that's come up every day, right? What happens when you're looking at, the old school fraud disclosures, which are there on ground for Indian regulators, but you have similar liabilities across various jurisdictions. When you are doing business across the world in so many geographies, you have to keep one, a consistent approach, and two, you have to ensure that there is a mapping of the lay of the land everywhere, right? So it's as it is a deep subject on ground, it is as important to look at it at a 30,000 or a 50,000 feet level above the ground, right? One of the things that we see is people dependency versus process dependency. It's the number one concern. I will get it done. Well, it's not about you getting it done. It's about, will the next person and the next person and the next person get it done after that, right? Will we truly institutionalize this process across the organization? So that's a challenge within an organization, right? And then Manjaree spoke about the different departments and the lack of sometimes, the mini organizations that get created and the lack of integration that stays there. But think about it, regulators and governments are also bringing in a challenge, which is they're saying that this is not about you, this is about us. We want you to do business a certain way. We will put your compliance officer in jail. Where you need to appoint a chief compliance officer, you need to appoint a nodal officer, whether it's the SEBI doing it, it's the RBI doing it, it's the IT Act doing it for the likes of big technology companies like Facebook and Google, right? So the environment has become socio-politically charged. The government is saying that what do I need out of you as an organization, and that dynamics is very different from when we were looking at it for a particular matter earlier, that the dynamics is completely changed, right? And of course, our Indian government does like to we've heard of the retroactive challenges, right? When the tax laws were repealed, especially in the case of the Vodafone matter, right? So it's an environment which has which is multifaceted. Nobody would think that a compliance officer's job on one side is the government, the internal stakeholders, the external stakeholders, from investors to public to the consumers. It's constantly changing. Mapping this is one part of the challenge, and another part is the lack of the last mile integration in our own organization. Yes, we try as best to say this responsibility goes down this chain, but that last mile, or that end person who reacts, who addresses an inspector who comes in, who finally deals with the last payment, the methodology, that last mile integration is one of the toughest challenges I have seen in my career. And as a role as a compliance officer, while I said it's compliance is no longer with the compliance department, I think one of the things that I rely on most is something that Raghu spoke about, is also the smell test. It doesn't feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, I mean, I'm trusting my gut more and more every day today to say, if it doesn't feel right, there is something, and we got to find that, right? So it's a diverse world, adding a little bit to the complexity that Manjaree and Raghu built. But back to you, Rishi, for more insights on the topic.
Well, Kanika, great points. A lot of new perspectives are emerging. Few data points I would like to throw in, because we have done a lot of deep research on the subject. A small MSME company with just about 100 employees, with single state operation, single manufacturing plant, say they are dealing with pharmaceutical, they deal with about 1,000 compliances a year, about 70 to 75 licenses, 498, so almost 50% of them have a jail term. Such a company deals with about 600 odd regulatory changes in the year based on 1 year of research that we have done. That's the kind of complexity that you're dealing with. And a company with 100 people cannot afford to spend lakhs of rupees a month hiring consultants like labor consultant, EHS consultant, finance consultants, direct tax, indirect tax, industrial licensing consultants, labor law consultants. And in case you get notices, unlucky enough to get slapped with notices, then whole battery of lawyers to deal with all of this. While 1991 reforms took care of the license Raj, in 2022, about 30 years later, we are still dealing with Inspector Raj. We did an assessment once upon a time to find that there are actually 59 different kinds of inspectors that can show up at your doorstep at any point in time, across, of course, various acts and regulations. So the complexity of compliance management goes far beyond, things that we normally see. There's that invisible large piece where 4 people in your compliance organization are fortunately or unfortunately responsible for tens of thousands of compliances for an organization as large as some of you who are dealing with. So let's switch gears now, right? So I think our audience today have a good view of what does it take to manage compliances, right? What is the complexity? But I'm sure with over 80, 90 years of collective experience between the 3 of you, you have evolved various practices to deal with this complexity, right? From creating a culture, managing goals of people who are responsible, bringing the visibility on all the way to the executive management, to deploying tools and products that help you stay on top. Many things that I'm sure each one of you have done. Let me start this time with Raghu. So Raghu, bringing you back into the conversation, enlighten our audience with some tips and tricks that they can go back with and start working on them to improve the health of compliance in their organization. How is this changing in the digital age?
So, Rishi, a lot of points have been made, but one of the very important things that I think Kanika was also mentioning, organizations must step back a little bit and actually map. You don't have to be in a hurry to implement a law. You don't have to map the requirements. And if you recall, I was referring to standard operating processes for, and those are very good practices that happen. Now you should be able to actually use technology to be able to draft SOPs and give it to everybody in the company. Those days people used to handwrite them, and take, we had to type. So one of the very important things that when you map a particular regulation and what is the requirement of the regulation and what is it that you have to, and I've often come across this where people tend to take a defensive posture. We will do it this way. If the regulator asks, we'll explain it this way. Law is always written with one purpose. There is a very clear, in every act, there is you have, exactly what is the purpose for which it was written and the objective of the act. So that must be kept in mind when you are actually mapping the law or the regulation or any of the things. And the second most important thing that I have seen that organizations fail or succeed based on how is the tone at the top and how much time you want to invest into people. You got to train. And as Kanika and Manjaree was saying, 4 or 5 people in an organization that has lakhs of people cannot be held responsible. You can use them as the scapegoats, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help. If you really want to develop institutions of the scale and size that you want, it is very important that you invest into people, tell them what's the right way. I don't think any human being gets up in the morning thinking that today I'll go and do a non-compliant activity, and the problem is that because of lack of information or lack of what they can do or they cannot do. And the other thing that I've seen in this rat race for being ahead of people, we were taught when in doubt, ask. Okay. Today, people in doubt will not ask and go and kill themselves. That's the problem in compliance. And that I can tell you, Kanika must be facing that every day, so must be Manjaree. In the sense that people will come to you after they've done the deal.
Yes.
To tell you the question is that, for God's sake, you have a counsel, you have Manjaree, you have to check with them whether you can do that, you can't do that. when in doubt, and we do that even today. Even today, when only yesterday we were trying to close a transaction and I had 2 or 3 doubts. I said, sorry, I'm not going to sign off till the time I check with, and I didn't only check with one counsel, I checked with 3 counsels on the subject, because 2 counsels were agreeing with what I was saying and 1 counsel was not agreeing. So you have to, so you got to be played very carefully, and compliance is, it's, you have to understand the letter and spirit of the law. If you go, there are, I remember many years back, one very senior leader said, we've been running this business for the last 40 years, nothing wrong has happened, and therefore we must be compliant. That's an assumption. Just because you've been lucky 40 years doesn't mean the 41st year you'll be lucky. And
I couldn't agree more with you. And in my role, fortunately or unfortunately, right, I get to sit in front of hundreds of executives every year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that bothers me the most is the indifference of the chief executive officers in most cases to the importance of compliance, right? And Manjaree, example which will sound funny, I asked them, do you think your organization is compliant? Nobody says absolutely, right? You'll see, I think so, right? And you ask them for the evidence as to why do you think it is compliant? Most of them will give you the same answer that Raghu just mentioned, which is, oh, we don't have a lot of notices. So lack of notices, fortunately or unfortunately, has started to become as a proxy for their compliance in their minds.
I will give you, Rishi, I'll give you a small example. In my previous, when we were in American Express, in one of the Wall Street announcement, the chairman went and said, I operate in 120 markets and I am fully compliant. Do you know what was the impact of that on the stock price that day? The American Express stock went up by $18. $18, not 18 cents.
And this is,
Raghu, that is the power. You ask the GE chairman, he could go and stand in front of any analyst and say, I am compliant, because there might be outages, but the intent to comply is fully there till the last mile. The intent is very important. Then you will always have outages, but the intent has to come top down, and you must hang people if they don't consistently not comply.
And most people don't realize that the cost of raising debt and cost of raising equity in this day and age is very heavily dependent on your reputation as a compliant organization.
Yes.
People don't realize that one non-compliance can put you on the front page of an Economic Times or Mint or Wall Street Journal, and you can say goodbye to talented people for the next decade who will shy away from joining a non-compliant organization. Good vendors would not want to work with you because you're perceived to be non-compliant in the industry. Your board members, the selection of board members is heavily dependent on your image as a compliant employer. Most people don't realize the power of staying compliant. And to your point, Raghu, going out there, putting the neck on the line and saying, we are compliant, not just in intent, but we built processes, people, systems, and brought them together in order to start a journey which is a continuum journey, which doesn't have a destination. We wake up every morning and we live and breathe compliance, and that's how we want to grow and scale our business.
One of the things that senior business leaders have started seeing as part of the response to what you're saying, Rishi, is the value of this. And that's what Raghu was bringing on the table. Senior business leaders know this is a leverage today, and this is no longer a cost.
I think I would put, at the risk of being identified an outcast, I would want to say that compliance professionals have to take responsibility for educating their executives.
Yes, I agree.
So Manjaree, do you want to come in at this point and talk about this specific area?
Yes, certainly. And I would refer to, of course, with due respect to what Raghu said and Kanika mentioning, absolutely dot on. I think, to my mind, how do you tackle this? I mean, I always believe that there are 2 aspects of compliance. In the larger circle, you could divide it in almost 2 parts. One is the statutory compliance piece. Everybody understands that it's a hygiene factor. You cannot do business until and unless you're complying with the law of the land. And therefore, it is extremely important for you to be able to map your compliance across the various laws that apply to you, map the risk alongside with that, and ensure consistent processes. And thankfully these days, the last 2-3 years of COVID and otherwise the increase in technology, the legal tech has increased to such an extent that it is now so readily available. Every single person should be using a compliance tool. I appreciate that everybody sometimes does not have that amount of wherewithal or the, to incur that cost on compliance. But let me again ensure people that if you are looking at your allocation of costs in your company, I think this is a cost well spent, because if the cost of non-compliance is extremely high. If you are in a production business or you're in a service business, whichever industry you may be in, it will stop if there is a non-compliance. You bear the risk of stopping your business if that happens. So I think Raghu is making a point.
Yeah, no, you use the word cost. I just want to correct that. Investment. It's an investment for your organization. It's not a cost.
Even a better.
Just adding to.
Yeah, absolutely. Even a better word, the investment. And you should realize that that commercial people understand investments much more. So if there is an investment made, there is always a return on investment that we are all looking for. And that return on investment is that your company remains compliant and whichever business you are in continues without any business discontinuity. Look at what the gains you will make. That is your return on investment. Everything stalls. If there is a lock and somebody comes and puts a labor inspector comes and puts a lock on your factory, then you're quite done. So, and you'll end up spending so much more in terms of rectifying that, coupled with a complete erosion of your reputation and brand, and finding yourselves for the wrong reasons in the newspapers. I think that is the equation that needs to be understood. And you are quite right that many, I would say, not most, many people today are on they appreciate and understand this value. And are increasingly doing it because somehow it has also become a constraint because of the increasing regulation and an even more increasing and stringent enforcement by the regulators. It's become a necessity. So sometimes I feel, okay, one always learns the hard way. At least one learns that the importance of this compliance is always there. So that is a very important aspect from a typically statutory management or statutory compliances. Nobody in the compliance team alone can do it. Compliances have to be bifurcated amongst the people who are responsible for it, but there has to be a consistent overall system that speaks to the various verticals in a business. There is a common measurable metric, and that is what needs to get measured across. And in your digitized tools that we have these days, all those features are available. It's a question of putting it into practice and ensuring that it runs in the right way. Because in a very fast-paced digital environment, if your management and if your CEO wants to know where are we on compliance today, it should be away at a click of a button. You should be able to press a button and create dashboards, and it should give you the live report of that day, and the person should be able to see it. Many of us, like Raghu and myself, who are in listed entities, we've got to present it to the board every quarter. And that's a huge responsibility to be able to do that. Now, having said that, that's one aspect of compliance to my mind. And of course, it requires the necessary wherewithal from the top management downwards. The other aspect of compliance, in which we've alluded to and talked about in different, during our conversation, is basically building the culture of compliance. What does that entail? That has a segue into how you manage your statutory compliances as well, because you certainly begin, like Raghu mentioned, that compliance is a matter of doing it both in letter and in spirit. And that comes from the culture of compliance that you build in the organization. That the onus for that lies at the board level, when you do have, all companies have boards, whether listed or unlisted, and also with the senior management. The kind of importance that they place on it. Are we doing compliance risk assessments at a very regular pace in the organization? Are we having consistent monitoring mechanisms? Are we discussing compliance on a very regular basis at the management level? Now, again, this is again a problem that we see with larger organizations because, unless and until all verticals of a business, heads of those verticals come and sit together with the CEO and spend dedicated time discussing compliance and the risks associated. Where are the gaps? What are we doing towards it? How are you going to increase your levels of compliance and awareness around this? When that awareness comes, the decision comes from the top. It is easier to implement it down the line. More importantly, these kind of discussions, your risk assessments, your audits, give you areas of gap. Now, sometimes audit is always a very, a word that everyone gets worried about. I personally feel audits are always good. Before somebody can slap a show cause notice on you or a legal notice on you, it's best to have audits, because you should never be afraid of them, because they throw up things which you can then address and fix. Audits are meant to throw up gaps. They should be taken positively, that they will show you areas where even the best of systems, sometimes there will be gaps. Those gaps need to be periodically filled. Or fixed. There is nothing wrong about that. Once that is done, then therefore, and today we have such a digital society, society or an environment where there is a use of data, there is a data mining, there is artificial intelligence that you can use to throw up, what could be predictive analysis, right? You can predict what are the areas which actually always show a compliance deficit in the organization, which are the areas where the gaps occur most. You can tailor your trainings around them. That creates that importance. And when you tailor, one is your generic training, and then is your tailored training, which can work towards improving people's understanding of these areas. And finally, also the communication piece. Now, the compliance team can put up posters, can keep doing trainings, can do these periodic mailers, etc. But you've got to ensure that the right people in the organization, which is the board, which is the CEO, which are the vertical heads, I have a simple thing about it. I say that when a vertical head speaks, all the people in his team are bound to listen to him. Why not? I've usually used this, in the companies that I've worked. I talk to the business heads. I tell them that you speak about it. Sometimes I even help them with the text to tell them what they need to speak about it. I said, you speak about it. Every member of your team is going to listen to it, rather than me standing up and speaking, because then people pay attention to people they directly report to. You see, so that is very important. And as leaders, if you set the tone right, and if you set the right example, all your people below you, your managers and others, are looking up to you. Your behavior, both in letter and spirit, and your conduct is what will enable people below you to be able to follow you. And that actually sets the culture of compliance in the organization. And that also leads to people doing the statutory compliances correctly. It is not a tick in the box. They will diligently do it because they realize that it is important and we need to do it without being policed. So I think these are, to my mind, what we can do towards, really achieving the right form of compliances, and some of the things that, that work, I feel, from working to having a better grip on the compliance management.
Manjaree, very well said. A few important points for everyone. Creating a culture starts top down, making sure that a little bit of awareness, sensitization is there for the executive management. Data-driven presentations are done rather than anecdotal presentations saying, oh, don't worry, main hoon na. That works only when Shah Rukh Khan is on the other side. When compliance officers are on this side, you actually need more than an anecdotal evidence, which is data-backed, right? As they say, right, good data beats opinion. And it's very important to build a data-driven compliance story. Bad news doesn't get better with time. If there is non-compliance, it's better that we face it today than we get slapped with a notice tomorrow. So that's very well said. In fact, over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of inquiries come in for contractor compliance audits, right? Companies deal, and all of your companies are fairly sizable. And unfortunately, the contractor non-compliance ends up being the responsibility of the principal in many cases. and so on. So a lot of companies are looking for services on contractor compliance audit. We in fact built a whole module to deal with that so that you can go ahead, Manjaree.
No, I just, if I might interject, my
Please.
apologies for that, but this is a topic that is very, very topical with us. And we employ an equal number of contractors as we do our permanent employees. And there are just so many of them, and we are responsible as principal employers for their compliances. And we do feel that there are gaps, not because sometimes they are not aware. Other times they don't have the wherewithal. At times they are just negligent about it, and it all falls back on you. So we have just begun this project where we've extended our digital tool to manage contractor compliances, and we're trying to do a pilot on this right now to see how it works for the next 2 months or so. If all goes well, we've assigned it to our top tier contractors, and if all goes well, then we will extend it to the remaining, because we intend to bring them within the ambit, and there is a whole department that has been created to manage contractors and their compliances. So I think because we cannot afford for this to go wrong, because this derails us unnecessarily. And you know, the Inspector Raj is very much there, and you know, it exists, it's a reality. And at times, for no fault of yours, and you know, you get sort of into the ring and you have to kind of waste a lot of time and energy and resources. So it's best to try and be a little more preemptive. We thought about this very hard, and we said, how do we, we've got contracts with them which say that they need to manage their compliances, and they give us certificates. Now, you know, they can do a tick in the box and send the certificate. So it's, I mean, we believe that, but it is when something happens and then everything gets, up in the air, you realize that perhaps it was not really happening, or they were not aware of it, or their understanding of it was not appropriate. So we've now wanting to build this to the next level, and also give trainings to them, how to manage the tool, how to work on the compliances, and in the process also tell them of the importance of compliance. So I am very hopeful that this is a step in the right direction, and we should be able to achieve some measure of success. And hopefully, 6 months down the line, if you have another webinar like this, maybe I should be able to provide some more data on it.
Absolutely. And, because of the demand in the market, we actually ended up building a whole product module around contractor compliance module, specially usable by companies that deal with a lot of contractors, so that they have a periodic way of assigning compliances, liaisons on the other side, getting dashboards to show you non-compliances, periodic non-compliances, continuous defaulters, and so on and so forth, so that you can link it back to finance and stop their payments until some of this gets done. Similarly, a lot of companies are even opting for compliance audits. You mentioned extensively, right? People don't want to just rely on an anecdotal evidence of some person within the company saying, yeah, main hoon na. Don't worry about it. That doesn't work anymore. All public listed companies today reach out, and we are working extensively with many large ones where we are helping them do quarterly, monthly, half yearly, annually, depending on their size, scale, and need. We are helping them do compliance audits, and that's an area where it bubbles up non-compliances up front. I mean, you don't have to wait till a notice is slapped on you. It tells you where the gaps are, where people issues are there, where processes are not getting followed, where continuous defaults are there. You can pull up the departmental heads, you can write them up in their KRAs, you can evaluate them at the end of the year. And that's when earlier conversation, Kanika also brought up, creating that culture of compliance where it's not an option. You have to do it. It's a part of the organization's obligations to its shareholders, to its employees, to customers, and so on and so forth. So very important point. I think we are almost at the top of the hour. I would extend it by a few more minutes. There are a few questions already. While I do request audience to share some of their questions. There are 6 questions. So if you can look at those questions in the meantime, Kanika, what do you think? I mean, what should our audience do differently in order to manage compliances better? What are these practices?
I think, Rishi, while a lot has been said on what would help create a good compliance department, I think one also needs to think about, as somebody who's leading the compliance department or in their role as a compliance leader, what do they need to do? What is their job? Their job is not necessarily to go out and get the last license, right? Their job is to make sure They are getting that buy-in. They are helping create that tone. And I think that's something that sometimes people say that, oh, business doesn't support us or leadership didn't support us. And I think to any compliance person listening here, I think it's your duty to go and create that awareness, cull out that, bring about how is it that an executive in your organization should treat this subject. You have to guide them, mentor them, almost to say, for compliance, we need this, right? That's I think having that vision is very important for somebody in compliance. Because guess what? The business guy's vision is not supposed to be on compliance. You are supposed to bring that vision, right? Bringing in your professional skepticism, your smell test, and making sure the right things get escalated. There's so much to do. Be strategic, be visionary about where you're taking your organization on a compliance journey. That's a very important thing. There are so many risks from all that we spoke about over the last 1 hour. If you can hone in on your top 10, your attention areas, your focus areas, then you can make a success of what you envisioned. I think that's something very, very key. Yeah.
Excellent. Very well said. There are a few questions. A few of them have come from, I think, joinees from a law firm in Delhi. I don't know if any one of you got a chance to look at them. There's a question on ESG. How important is it for companies to initiate their ESG journey from a compliance standpoint on a voluntary basis beyond regulatory compliance? Anyone wants to take that question?
I could take that one. And I think it is very, very important to now start focusing on ESG. For the very reason that, the top 1,000 companies is mandatory. They will have to do it. Your investors, your stakeholders are looking very seriously at ESG. Even for startups where people are investing money, your investors who are bringing in the money are also wishing for you to be ESG compliant. This has become more so in the last 3 years, where we have seen COVID bring about a sea change in the way people have thought. If you do, I was reading somewhere that mutual funds of companies which are high on ESG have done exceedingly well in the last 2 to 3 years as opposed to others. The questions that people are asking, that, they do expect companies to also think a little more than just profit and making the money. It is also about societal. It's also about giving back to society. It is also about ensuring good governance across the board. So I think whether of course, it's mandatory for certain types of companies, the listed ones in the top 1,000. But I think there is already a sea of change in terms of the way this is being factored in across the board. So even if you are a private company and where this does not statutorily apply to you, it's a good time to start looking at it.
Manjaree, just to add to that, I think ESG has come to stay. It's not an option. Everybody, while the initial SEBI regulations talk about the top 1,000 listed entities, I guess in the years to come, it'll percolate down to every company. And that's how the company law also started. Company law, many of the sections started with the listed entities, and then it came down. And it'll no more be a hygiene item. I can say this because we operate in multi-jurisdictional markets. The kind of they actually rate you. They rate you, and based on your rating, you can leverage your debt in the market. Your bonds get reflected in that manner, and all your commercial papers get a better return on that. So it's something that we are already seeing, and it is something that every company should imbibe. The earlier, the better.
Great, thank you, Raghu. There are a couple of questions around data privacy, how GCs have dealt with data privacy breaches.
I could take that again. So you see, currently, and regrettably, not regrettably, but for some reason, the government has taken back the data privacy bill, and I'm sure they're coming out with a revised and a more modified version, because with the prevalence of data in everything we do, this bill has to come and should come sooner than later. Now, having said that, we are still living with the ID Act and whatever it talks about, in terms of data. And it's more about personal data privacy on personal data. I think breaches, we've only seen a breach in terms of, where we had some sort of a hacking of some kind at some point. And, it was mercifully plugged in time and there wasn't much of damage around that. But one of the reasons, one of the ways that this can be looked and done better is that how have we begun to look at it? We've now got a dedicated data privacy department, which is under my purview. We've just begun it this year in anticipation of the law that was to come, because it is requiring a huge sea change and a whole framework that needs to be planned and put into place in an organization for this kind of rules and regulations that the new data privacy law is bound to bring in, which is of course going to, have many similarities with the GDPR. And it will require a very consistent, a very one organizational, one team approach, given the stringency of demands that the government is going to make on you in terms of reverting back to them, the timelines, etc., the prosecutions. I think training, once that is put through, training is going to remain the key here, because people tend to forget about these things. You can talk to HR and they might just land up, forgetting to take consents where it is required. So people have to get used to it. It is not even their fault. I feel like Kanika was saying that there are some people, it's the job, it's not the commercial guy's job is to do his job, right? Or the HR guy's job is to do his job. It's the job of the compliance people to tell people that this is important. And that can only be done with a huge amount of trainings and more trainings, and then and do a lot of periodic audits and with them to find out if somebody is doing it or not doing it. Every month, if you have a measurable metric, things can always improve. So I see that as a starting point, and of course as the act sort of comes in, it will need implementation in the manner that it's provided for.
Absolutely. I think we have time for just one last question. As two members are members of GCAI, is there a direction in which the body is pushing for decriminalizing compliances? Let me talk to the founder himself.
We're talking to Raghu, who's our president, so I'm sure he's going to take that one.
In the sense that, I don't want to steal your show, Rishi, out here. It's all your show. So yes, GCI has basically, it's an organization that will work for the in-house councils, for their respect, their recognition, and obviously we plan to work very closely with the government, not as a lobbyist, but at a general level, so that the governance environment is substantially improved in the companies. That's the intent, and more we can talk offline. Happy to share all our. But just want to on the subject of it, I always wanted to say 2-3 things to the compliance folks here. Create 3 layers. One would be your prevention, one would be your detection, and one would be your response. And encourage people to speak up. Encourage people to have the courage of conviction to say, if something is going wrong somewhere, they should bring it to your attention. Your compliance officer will be more than happy to respond to that. But if you see a wrongdoing happening somewhere and you are quiet about it, nobody can help, and you'll end up with some prosecutions later on. Yeah.
On that last note, Rishi, if I might just take a couple of seconds more, and Raghu just brought out a more important point, ask people to speak up.
Yeah.
We can all ask them, but if there is a fear of retaliation, no one will speak up.
Yeah.
So from that flows a corollary which says that the culture of compliance should build in openness and transparency with no fear of retaliation for raising concerns. In fact, people should get rewarded for them, and because sometimes it can save the organization a huge bother if something is brought to that attention and it is plugged in time.
Yeah.
So, just as a parting shot.
Stitch and time saves 9, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Always.
Well, I don't feel like wrapping this up, but we are 10 minutes over the hour. A lot of wonderful thoughts, challenges, opportunities, suggestions, right from little things that we can do to change the culture to how technology can be leveraged, how data-driven non-anecdotal storytelling can be done, how reward structures can be created. All of these are wonderful points that our audience, I'm sure, has benefited from. I would want to extend a warm thanks to Manjaree, Kanika, and Raghu, our three panelists who've shared a wealth of their experience working through the years, seeing the evolution of compliance in the country, and talk to us today. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to in-person meetings soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rishi.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you
It
for
was a
everybody
pleasure.
for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.